All right, guys. The best or worst or most questionable Christmas pageant ever, at least depending on whether you believe Mrs. George Armstrong or the mother. We'll be starting chapter 4 now. The first pageant rehearsal was usually about as much fun as a 3-hour bus ride and just as noisy and crowded. This rehearsal, though, was different. Everybody shut up and settled down right away for fear of missing anything awful that the Herdmans might do. They got there 10 minutes late, sliding into the room like a bunch of outlaws about to shoot up a saloon. When Leroy passed Charlie, he knuckled him behind the ear, and one of the little primary girls yelled as Alice went by. But Mother said she was going to ignore everything except blood, and since the primary kid wasn't bleeding and neither was Charlie, nothing happened. Mother said, "And here's the Herdman family. We're glad to see you all," which is probably the biggest lie ever said right out loud in church. Imogene smiled, and the Herdman smile, we called it, kind of sly, sneaky. And there they sat, the closest thing to criminals that we knew about, and they were going to represent the best and most beautiful. No wonder everybody was so worked up. Mother started to separate everyone into angels and shepherds and guests at the end, but right away she ran into trouble. "Who are the shepherds?" Leroy Herdman wanted to know. "Where did they come from?" Ollie Herdman didn't even know what a shepherd was, or anyway that's what he said. "What was the inn?" Claude asked. "It's like a motel," somebody told him, "where people go to spend the night." "What people?" Claude said. "Like Jesus?" "Oh, honestly," Alice Wendelkin grumbled. "Jesus wasn't even born yet. Mary and Joseph went there." "Why?" Ralph asked. "What happened first?" Imogene hollered at my mother. "Begin at the beginning." That really scared me, because the beginning would be the book of Genesis, where it says "in the beginning," and if we had to go all the way back to the book of Genesis, we were never going to get through. The thing is, the Herdmans didn't know anything about the Christmas story. They knew that Christmas was Jesus' birthday. They knew that everything else was news to them. The shepherds, the wise men, the star, the stable, the crowded inn. Yeah. It was hard to believe. At least it was hard for me to believe. Alice Wendelkin said she had no trouble believing it at all. How would they know the Christmas story? They don't know anything about a Bible. And look what Gladys did to that Bible last week. While Imogene was snitching money from the collection plate, Gladys and Ollie were drawing mustaches and tails on all the disciples in the primary grade illustrated Bible. "They never even went to church in their whole life until your little brother told them we got refreshments," Alice said. "And all you ever hear about Christmas in school is how to make ornaments out of aluminum foil. So how would they know the Christmas story?" She was right, of course. They might have read about it, but they never read anything but Amazing Comics. And I suppose they might have heard about it on TV, but Ralph paid 65 cents for their TV at a garage sale, and you couldn't see anything on it unless somebody held onto the antenna. And even then you couldn't see much. The only other way for them to hear about the Christmas story was from their parents. I guess Mr. Herdman never got around to it before he climbed on the railroad train, and it was pretty clear that Mrs. Herdman had long since given up trying to teach them anything. So they just didn't know. And Mother said that she'd better begin by reading the Christmas story from the Bible. And that was a pain in the neck to most of us, because we knew the whole thing backward and forward, and we never had to be told anything except who we were supposed to be and where we were supposed to stand. "Joseph and Mary, his espoused wife, being great with child." "Pregnant!" yelled Ralph Herdman. Well, that stirred things up. The big kids started to giggle, and the little kids wanted to know what was funny, and Mother had to hammer on the floor with a blackboard pointer. "That's enough, Ralph," she said, and went on with the story. "I don't think it's very nice to say Mary was pregnant," Alice whispered. "Well, she was," I pointed out. In a way, though, I agreed with her. It sounded too ordinary. Anybody could be pregnant. Great with child sounded better for Mary. "I'm not supposed to talk about people being pregnant." Alice folded her hands in her lap and pinched her lips together. "I better tell my mother." "Tell her what?" "That your mother is talking about things like that in church. My mother might not want me to be here." I was pretty sure that she would do it, too. She wanted to be Mary, and she was mad at Mother, I knew that. She would make it sound worse than it was, and Mrs. Wendelkin would get madder than she already was. Mrs. Wendelkin didn't even want cats to have kittens or birds to lay eggs. She wouldn't let Alice play with anybody who had 2 rabbits. But there wasn't much that I could do about it except pinch Alice, which I did, and she yelped, and Mother separated us and made me sit beside Imogene Herdman, and sent Alice to sit in the middle of the baby angels. I wasn't all that crazy about sitting next to Imogene. After all, I'd spent my whole life trying to stay away from her. But she hardly even noticed me. "Shut up," was all she said. "I want to hear this." I couldn't believe it. Among other things, the Herdmans were famous for never sitting still or paying attention to anyone. Teachers, parents, their own or anyone else's, the truant officer, the police, and yet here they were with their eyes glued on my mother, taking in every word. "What's that?" they would yell when they didn't understand the language. And when Mother talked about there being no room at the inn, Imogene's jaw dropped open and she sat up in her seat. "My God," she said, "not even for Jesus?" I saw Alice purse her lips together, and I knew that that was something else Mrs. Wendelken would hear about. "Well, now, after all," Mother explained, "nobody knew the baby was going to turn out to be Jesus." "You said Mary knew," Ralph said. "Why didn't she tell him?" "I would have told him," Imogene put in. "Boy, would I have told him. What's the matter with Joseph that he didn't tell him? Her pregnant and everything," she grumbled. "What was it that they laid the baby in?" Leroy said. "A manger. Is that like a bed? Why would they have a bed in the barn?" "Well, that's the point," Mother said. "They didn't have a bed in the barn, so Mary and Joseph had to use what they had. What would you do if you had a new baby and no bed to put the baby in?" "We stuck Gladys in a bureau drawer," Imogene volunteered. "Well, there you are," Mother said, blinking a little. "You didn't have a bed, so you used something else." "Oh, we had a bed," Ralph said, "only Ollie was still in it and he wouldn't get out. He didn't like Gladys." He elbowed Ollie. "Remember how you didn't like Gladys?" I thought that was pretty smart of Ollie to not like Gladys right off the bat. "Anyway," Mother said, "Mary and Joseph used the manger. The manger was a large wooden feeding trough for animals." "What were the wadded-up clothes?" Claude wanted to know. "The what?" Mother said. "You read about it. She wrapped him in wadded-up clothes?" "Swaddling clothes," Mother sighed. "They used to wrap their babies up very tight in big pieces of material. It made the babies feel cozy and comfortable." I thought it probably made the babies mad. Till then, I didn't know what swaddling clothes were either. They sounded terrible. So I wasn't too surprised when Imogene got excited about that. "You mean to tell me they tied him up and put him in a feed box? Where was child welfare?" Child welfare was always checking up on the Herdmans. I'll bet if child welfare had found Gladys tied up in a bureau drawer, they would have done something about it. "And lo, the angel of the Lord came upon them," Mother said, "and the glory of the Lord shone round about them, and—" "Shazam!" Gladys yelled, flinging out her arms and smacking the kid next to her. "What?" Mother said. Mother didn't read Amazing Comics. "Out of the black night with horrible vengeance, the mighty "I don't know what you're talking about, Gladys," Mother said. "This is the angel of the Lord who comes to the shepherds out in the fields and—" "Out of nowhere, right?" Gladys said. "In the black night, right?" "Well," Mother said, "in a way." So Gladys sat back down, looking very satisfied, as if this at least was one part of the story that made sense to her. "Now, when Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea," Mother went on reading, "behold, there came wise men from the east to Jerusalem, saying—" "That's you, Leroy," Ralph said, "and Claude and Ollie. Pay attention." "What does it mean, wise men?" Ollie wanted to know. "Were they like school teachers?" "No, dumbbell," said Claude. "It means like the President of the United States." Mother looked surprised and a little pleased, like she did when Charlie finally learned the times tables. "So why, that's very close, Claude. Actually, they were kings." "Well, it's about time," Imogene muttered. "Maybe they'll tell that innkeeper where to get off and get the baby out of the barn." Then they saw the young child and Mary his mother, and they presented him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. "What's that stuff?" Leroy wanted to know. "Precious oils," Mother said, "and fragrant resins." "Oil!" Imogene hollered. "What kind of cheap king hands out oil for a present? You get better presents from the firemen." Sometimes the Herdmans got Christmas presents at the firemen's party, but the Santa Claus always had to feel around the packages to be sure that they weren't getting bows and arrows or dart guns or anything like that. Imogene usually got sewing cards or jigsaw puzzles, and she never liked them, but I guess she figured they were better than oil. Then we came to King Herod, and the herdmans had never heard of him either, so Mother had to explain that it was Herod who sent the wise men to find the baby Jesus. Was it him that sent the crummy presents? Ollie wanted to know. And Mother said it was worse than that. He planned to have baby Jesus put to death. What? Imogene said. He just got born and already they're trying to kill him? Well, the herdmans wanted to know all about Herod, what he looked like and how rich he was and whether he fought wars with people. He must have been the main king, Claude said, if he could make the other three do what he wanted them to do. If I was a king, Leroy said, I wouldn't let some other king push me around. You couldn't help it if he was the main king. Well, I'd go be king somewhere else. They were really interested in Herod, and I figured they liked him. He was so mean he could have been their ancestor. Herod Herdman? But I was wrong. Who's going to be Herod in this play? Leroy said. We don't show Herod in our pageant, Mother said, and they all got mad. They wanted somebody to be Herod so they could beat him up. Well, I couldn't understand the herdmans. You would have thought that the Christmas story had come right out of the FBI files. They got so involved in it, they wanted a bloody end to Herod. They were worried about Mary having her baby in a barn. They called the wise men a bunch of dirty spies. And they left the first rehearsal arguing about whether Joseph should have set fire to the inn or just run the innkeeper out of the county. Well, that's the end of chapter 4. See you tomorrow for chapter 5.